this is Miss Klemme and welcome to the podcast on skin anatomy. Now what we're looking at here is obviously the skin, highly magnified, but it's the top layer of cells, and that layer is called the stratum corneum. That's the dead skin cell layer where the cells can just slough off. Now when we look at the skin in more detail, we're going to be looking at layers upon layers upon layers. So I felt that this picture was a good introduction because you can physically see all of those layers. Now if we look at the side profile of the skin is called the integument. So today we're going to look at the integumentary system. The first top layer where that stratum corneum was taken from was called the epidermis. And you can see there's two kind of sub layers in the epidermis, one of which was that stratum corneum. The second layer, and where most of the important stuff is held, is called the dermis. And then below that is a layer of fat and blood vessels called the subcutaneous layer. And that fat just serves a barrier of insulation and of cushion. Let's zoom in on just the epidermis. So here are those two layers. The stratum germinativum, which produces new cells. Write that in here. And the stratum germinativum, would be right down here, at the very bottom of the epidermis. The stratum corneum is that top dead skin cell layer, way up here. And so basically those cells start out as basal cells and they work their way up over time to get to the top, and when they get to the top, then they fall off. In addition to those two layers, those cells are producing keratin. Keratin's like a waterproofing, tough chemical that helps to keep moisture in. The cells right below, at the very bottom of the epidermis, are the melanocytes. And the melanocytes are there to produce melanin, which is a pigment that determines how dark your skin gets. There's a few epidermal-based diseases that I'd like to bring to your attention. The first, cyanosis. This is blue skin due to low oxygen levels. The next one is much more common, vitiligo. This is where there's just patches of lack of melanin. So the melanocytes are producing in those particular areas. On the other hand, we can go to the extreme, which is albinism. And this is when your melanocytes don't produce any melanin. And this happens in all species. You can see an albino deer or an albino squirrel. And the last one is actually the difference between the dermis and the epidermis, and those are blisters. Due to burns or friction, that the separation can become magnified between the dermis and the epidermis. And we've all had those. Now let's move on to the dermis. You can see already the dermis does have a lot more different things in it than the epidermis. The first is the dermal papillae, and those are the ridges that you see in bright pink all along here, and they help to form your fingerprints. The second thing that's in the dermis are elastic fibers, and that's what makes our skin so flexible and stretchy. Now, over time, those elastic fibers start to wear down, which means we get wrinkles and our skin is not as elastic as it once was. And in fact, if we stretch those elastic fibers too far, we'll have permanent striae, or stretch marks, which sometimes you can see on obese individuals will have stretch marks, and pregnant women around their belly could have stretch marks as well too. And then the last dermis thing of importance to bring to your attention are birthmarks, and these are just simply these red marks that are formed from blood vessels that originate in the dermis that are just malformed. At this point, I'm likely to pause the podcast and complete the other link, the skin anatomy tutorial. And when you're finished with that, you can continue notes in this podcast. And welcome back to the Skin Anatomy podcast. We just got a few more things to bring to your attention. The first is the hair follicles that are in our skin. And the hair follicles actually originate more, you can see, in the dermis and the subcutaneous layer. But there's different types of hair throughout your lifetime, and the first type of hair is called lanugo. This is the really soft, fuzzy hair on newborn babies. The hair itself is called a shaft, and that shaft actually grows through a follicle. So we can see the shaft in yellow, and I'm coloring in red there. The follicle is around it. And the papilla is what the hair actually grows from, which we probably want to call the root. The erector pili, these are the little muscles. You can see one kind of here that attach to every single hair, and then when they contract, they cause goosebumps. And the last thing about hair, alopecia, is the complete loss of hair, or the ability to not grow hair, which is different from male pattern baldness. There are 4 different sense receptors in the skin. The first one is the temperature receptor, thermoreceptor, senses hot and cold. This second one is called a nociceptor, which senses pain. And the 2 that are more specific that you should be able to differentiate are the 2 levels of touch. The Meissner's corpuscle versus the Pacinian corpuscle. I always remember Pacinian starts with P, and so that senses larger pressures, like someone pinching you, whereas the Meissner's is just like a feather touching you. Two other portions of the skin we have yet to address. Nails are part of the skin, and they're made from keratin to protect our fingertips. And the different types of glands that are in our skin. We have sweat glands, which contain things found in urine that help to cool us down and remove waste from our body. There is a sweat gland in this diagram over here. The other type of gland is a sebaceous gland, which is attached to hair follicles, and they secrete oil, which is also called sebum. And finally, if you get an overproduction of sebum from the sebaceous glands, that can result in acne. Now, as I wrap things up, I just want to bring to your attention 3 main functions of the skin. Well, the primary function of the skin is protection. After all, it is the largest organ in your body. And that protection comes in the form of keratin, which helps prevent dehydration, from melanin production, which protects from the sun's UV rays, and sweat, which removes waste. Now, sweat also provides temperature regulation. So as we sweat, we lose that heat and cools the body. In addition, the blood vessels in the dermis also play a role in temperature regulation. Those blood vessels can get wider, they can dilate to cool us off, because then if they dilate, more blood is pumped towards the surface of the skin, and that's why our skin gets flushed when we work out. We're just trying to cool off our body. And the last function are sense organs. The Meissner's and Pacinian, which are the touch and pressure. The nociceptors are the pain, and then the thermoreceptors are for temperature. So that's a basic anatomy lesson on the skin, or the integument, along with the functions. And I hope you found that helpful.